What's up, people? It's your girl Adiola. So, Nigerian presidential election is coming. Hello, it's here. It's almost here. And I'm like, you know what? Let's take a good look at some of the popular candidates that will be running for presidency. Of course, there are so many people that are running. Good luck to all of them. But 3 people are very popular, and I think we should take a look at their past record. What have they done when they were in office? The good things as well as the bad things, just to help us to make better informed decisions. Now, keep in mind, I am not sponsored by anybody. APC did not sponsor me, and PDP did not sponsor me either. I beg you, I am not endorsing any candidate. There's nothing that I will say today that you cannot find for yourself if you do your own research. I have never met any of these candidates except Mr. Jonathan, and you can be rest assured that he's not sponsoring me. I just want to make sure that we don't just vote for anybody this time around, especially based on religious sentiment, because a lot of people have already made up their mind that no, he's a Christian, he has to do it, he has to be there. No, he's a Muslim, he has to be there. I said, shoot, people. Also, I like to note that APC will soon hold a primary election, so eventually only one candidate will emerge from APC to face Mr. President in PDP. So let's start with the APC candidates. First of all, meet former Vice President Atiku Abubakar. He's 67 years old. He married 5 wives and divorced one of them so that he would have 4 wives. So now he has 4 wives and he has 30 children. He was Vice President for 8 years, and here are some good things that he did. Atiku is one of the key founders of PDP, the People's Democratic Party, which is now the biggest political party in Africa. And this PDP was actually the one that brought Obasanjo out of prison and made him a presidential candidate. So a lot of people believe that without Atiku, there wouldn't have been PDP. So that's one good thing that he did. And as a vice president, he introduced a number of initiatives, such as the National Poverty Eradication Program, NAPEP. It has failed now, but he introduced it. And also, he was part of the formation of Universal Basic Education Program. And then he also organized an industrial roundtable, and he advocated for the revival of education in northern Nigeria. Atiku also founded American University of Nigeria. It's a very good university, and recently he gave scholarship to some of the Chibok girls that escaped Boko Haram. Unfortunately, I couldn't find many good things that Atiku did when he was vice president, so I'm not being partial if I say more of the good things that other people have done. It's just because that's all that I could find about him. Now let's talk about the not so good things about Atiku. There are more than a dozen counts of corruption charges against him. Just keep in mind that Atiku has denied all these charges. He says that they are all politically motivated by the former president Olusegun Obasanjo through the EFCC. Now, some of the charges include embezzlement of public funds as well as money laundering. There was a time Atiku and one of his wives, Jennifer Douglas Atiku, were accused of laundering more than $40 million, Nigeria's money, to the US. He's also been accused of diverting about $125 million of public funds into private projects. There was also a time that he was accused of diverting $6 million from the Special Petroleum Fund that was directly under his supervision at that time into iGate company in Louisville, Kentucky. And as a matter of fact, a US congressman that was involved in that case had been sentenced to 13 years in prison. The man is in prison right now. Now, there are allegations that he received more than $4.6 million in bribes from the German company called Siemens. The FBI also raided the house of Atiku in Maryland, and his wife fled to Nigeria. Now, Atiku was never officially indicted for these crimes, both in Nigeria or the US, and he has denied it several times, but people are saying that these things are true. Now, Atiku has a $1 million house in Potomac in Maryland, which he has abandoned since the issue of his corruption case in the US surfaced. Now, the next person on the list, also representing APC, is the former military head of state, Major General Muhammadu Buhari. He is 71 years old, and his first wife passed away in 2006. He's presently married to 1 wife and now has 7 children. Now, I found out so many things about Buhari that I'm hoping that you guys will bear with me. It's a lot. Now, before Muhammadu Buhari took over power, Shagari's administration was known for extreme corruption, waste of resources, mismanagement, and lack of sanitation. Corruption was celebrated at that time, just like it is today, and we were having religious and political violence. Now, Buhari took over power in a military coup on December 31st of 1983, and he was in power for less than 2 years. Now, here are some good things that Buhari did. Him and his chief of general staff of the time, Tunde Idiagbon, originally from Ilorin, Kwara State, both of them, they arrested so many corrupt politicians. In fact, I heard that they arrested hundreds of of corrupt officials and they put them all in prison. Many ministers were convicted in military courts and jailed. Everybody that had questionable wealth at that time became afraid to show it off because there was zero tolerance for corruption. Buhari also launched the famous war against indiscipline, which means zero tolerance for indiscipline in Nigeria. So it became a crime at that time for people to rush into buses. If anybody tried to rush in the bus, soldiers would be there to beat them up. So people were forced to start lining up. Nigerians became orderly. Nobody could cut lines, even in banks. So everything became first come, first serve. It's not a matter of who you know. And everybody obeyed the traffic laws. No one was allowed to drive on the wrong side of the road. Students were forbidden from cheating. Sellers were prevented from suddenly raising the price of commodity in order to make quick gain. Showing up late for work was no longer accepted. Everyone was getting to work on time. In fact, neglecting your children also became a crime at that time. Buhari and Idi Agbon also introduced the famous environmental sanitation. So it became a crime to litter in public places and all the parks had to be clean. It paid up all our debt. Nigeria had no debt whatsoever. In fact, during his time, inflation rate came down from 23% to 5%. The Nigerian naira was so strong at that time. Also, drug trafficking was minimal during Buhari's time because Buhari was actually executing drug dealers. Now, before becoming the head of state, from 1976 to 78, he was the petroleum minister under President Obasanjo. Buhari was also the head of the NNPC when it was first created. At that time, Buhari built 3 oil refineries, one in Port Harcourt, one in Warri, and one in Kaduna. Nigeria was refining our own oil. We were not exporting our oil to refine, and we were exporting fuel. Buhari also masterminded the construction of 20 oil depots throughout Nigeria, laying over 3,200 kilometers of pipelines. Also, during Abacha's time, Buhari was appointed as the chairman of the Petroleum Trust Development Fund, controlling billions of dollars excess fund. And to his credit, the PTF was managed with transparency. For the years that it existed, PTF published its annual report on time, and they always addressed press conferences to respond to issues that are arising from the reports. And during that time, Buhari used the excess funds to construct roads all across Nigeria. I found out that in the 4 years that he was in charge of PTF, they constructed more roads all across Nigeria than the Nigerian government has constructed in the last 15 years. Now, the PTF under Buhari also supplied textbooks and learning materials for students nationwide, and they supplied drugs for hospitals. And lastly, they rehabilitated our mass transit system, supplying public buses. Buhari was the one that discovered the late Professor Dora Akunyili, and he was actually the one that nominated her for her position in NAFDAC. Also, Buhari was the first head of state or president to put women in cabinet. Buhari is the only Nigerian former head of state or former president with no foreign bank account that we know of, and also the only one with no assets abroad. Well, Goodluck Jonathan said he doesn't have foreign bank account, but no one has really investigated that. Buhari also has one house in Kaduna and one in his hometown. He doesn't have any house in Abuja or any land. He has no oil rigs and currently lives on pension. As a matter of fact, he wasn't getting paid when he worked as the head of the Petroleum Development Trust Fund because he was already getting his pension at that time, so he refused, which is why he couldn't even afford the 27 million naira presidential nomination fund. He had to take a loan from the bank. Now, Buhari has never been convicted of any crime, despite the fact that various tribunals had been set up by Obasanjo and by Babangida to investigate Buhari, yet he's never been convicted of embezzling 1 naira. Of course, people accuse Buhari of stealing money, but none of them have been able to prove it. Oh, one other thing, when Buhari was the head of state, he stood up against the West when they were trying to meddle in our business. The IMF and the World Bank pressured Buhari to devalue naira because naira was really strong at that time. It was already 1 naira to $2. In fact, at that time, Nigerians were able to spend naira when they go outside Nigeria. So they felt that naira would be competing with the dollar and other major currencies. And they didn't like that, especially coming from an African country. So they also told Buhari that he should borrow money from the IMF. But Buhari refused. Instead, he focused on paying off our debt. So the IMF and the World Bank cut Nigeria from World Trade Organization. So Buhari resorted to trade by barter. We were giving oil in exchange for goods from Brazil, from Austria, Canada, France, Germany, anybody that would trade with us. So Western interests actually were the ones that sponsored Babangida to overthrow Buhari and devalue Naira. Naira went down like suddenly. Of course, Babangida cooperated because Buhari was about to retire him, from what I found out, because Babangida had allegedly been involved in some drug-related issues. Now, let's talk about some not-so-good things about Buhari. When Buhari was jailing corrupt officials, he also jailed some people that were actually innocent. They were later released, but many people were thrown in prison before they were proven whether guilty or not guilty. Also, because Buhari sentenced some drug dealers to death, a lot of people found that as extreme. In fact, some people say that Buhari is crazy and radical. Also, there was a time that Buhari hired an Israeli to kidnap Umaru Diko. That's one of the most corrupt officials during Shehu Shagari's time. And he escaped to the UK when Buhari took over power. Buhari had him kidnapped in the UK. He hired an Israeli. They kidnapped him and they put him in coma. And then they hid him in a suitcase. They were bringing him back to Nigeria to serve jail time in a suitcase. And then they got busted at the airport. So yeah, Buhari can be crazy. Also, Buhari jailed some journalists under what they call Decree 4. He announced at that time that any journalists that write articles that they could not back up with evidence will be jailed, and he jailed some journalists for about 4 months. His argument was that he was trying to prevent libel. And of course, you know, jailing journalists is always a human rights violation. Also, when he awarded contracts to build roads when he was the head of PTF, he awarded those contracts allegedly mainly to his friends. Another issue is that many people were saying that most of the roads were constructed in northern Nigeria. Also, when he was the head of state, he stopped the Lagos railway construction at that time, and his argument is that Nigeria was borrowing money to do this construction and that he needed to stop all the borrowing and think about how to pay the debt first. Also, people say that Buhari is stubborn. I say, heck yeah, he is. I mean, this man has contested for presidency 3 consecutive times already, and this is his 4th time? Yeah, he must be really stubborn. Now, some people are also saying that Buhari is too strict. He's too disciplined. So a lot of corrupt people don't want him to run again because they're saying he may get rid of them. And you know, he's really strict. In fact, there was a time that he went abroad for a military training. He was sponsored at that time by the Nigerian government. And when he came back to Nigeria, he returned the remnant of his stipend. And don't forget that when Babangida took over power, he put Buhari in prison for about 3.5 years. And when Buhari came out of the prison, he found out that his wife had been collecting financial support from Babangida while Buhari was away. And guess what he did? He divorced her. The woman passed away in 2006, but he divorced her because he felt like she had compromised. So there are speculations among so many Christians that Buhari is a Muslim fanatic and that he wants to Islamize Nigeria. This to me is a misconception because Babangida was actually the one that made Nigeria a member of the OIC. That's the Organization of Islamic Conference. When Buhari was the head of state, religion was never an issue. Again, I'm not campaigning for Buhari, but I'm just trying to address that issue of Islamizing Nigeria. There was no religious violence during Buhari's time, not even once. Him and his vice president at that time, Idi Agbon, they were both Muslims, yet they did not Islamize Nigeria. He actually had a Christian running mate in 2011 that was Pastor Tunde Bakari, and I know that his personal driver of 10 years is a Christian, as well as his cook. Let's take a look at the third candidate representing PDP. That's His Excellency, Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan. He is 56 years old and he has 1 wife and 2 children. Jonathan had been a deputy governor as well as a governor, a vice president before becoming the president. He's been in power for almost 6 years now. He served the remaining 2 years that Yaradua was supposed to serve, and he's now going to complete his 4th year in office, making 6 years. Now, let's take a look at the good things that he did in the last 6 years. Airports were repainted in Nigeria. Several airports were repainted. We now have air-conditioned trains in Lagos as well as light rail in Abuja. He's also constructing trains to link cities and states together. He also fixed the Benin Ore Express Road. He privatized electricity, and he sent some Nigerian students abroad to study on government scholarship. After privatizing electricity, some parts of Nigeria claim to have seen an improvement in the electricity supply. Jonathan also claims to have created 1 million jobs, and he said that he reduced poverty by 50%. Unfortunately, the claim that he created 1 million jobs has not been verified. No one has really seen where these jobs are, and there is no substantial evidence that he actually reduced poverty by 50%. According to calculations, he actually reduced it by 5%. Also, because of Jonathan's agricultural transformation agenda, Nigeria's food import bill has reduced from about $7 billion to $4.3 billion annually. He also set aside 50 billion naira for agricultural mechanization fund. And under Jonathan, Nigeria now has Africa's largest rice mill. Also, this last weekend, the federal government announced under President Jonathan that they've reached a ceasefire agreement with Boko Haram, stating that the Chibok girls will be released. Let's look at some not so good things about President Goodluck Jonathan. His administration has been marred by various corruption charges. Not a single person has been successfully prosecuted since Jonathan became president. Not only that, a lot of evidently corrupt people are actually being celebrated in Nigeria during Jonathan's time. For example, former aviation minister Stella Odua allegedly spent $2.5 million on bulletproof cars. She stepped down 4 months after, but she was never prosecuted. Now she's a chief in her hometown. Also, the former House Speaker Farouk Lawan and Femi Otedola got away with $600,000 bribe scandal. Despite audio and video evidence, they got away till today. And those who embezzled the police pension fund, billions of naira, are still enjoying the stolen money. They were taken to court, out of court. No one has been successfully prosecuted for embezzling the police pension fund. President Goodluck Jonathan actually pardoned Alamasia, a convicted felon, the former governor of Bayelsa, who stole millions of dollars, taxpayers' money. Even though Alamasia served his prison term, Mr. Jonathan gave him a presidential pardon. Now, during Mr. Jonathan's administration, $49 billion went missing in the Nigerian treasury. Later, they said that it's only $20 billion. Instead of finding the money, Mr. Jonathan decided to suspend the whistleblower, that's the CBN governor, Lamido Sanusi. Jonathan is also the first Nigerian president to own so many private jets, about 10 of them. He has so far refused to declare his assets publicly. During Jonathan's time, Boko Haram killed more than 13,000 Nigerians and displaced more than 3 million people. Also, more than 200 girls were kidnapped for 6 months under President Jonathan. We've borrowed about $10 billion since President Jonathan became president from China, from other places, and he's the first Nigerian president to budget $1 billion naira for food inside Aso Rock. He also removed oil subsidy, raising the price of oil overnight by more than 200%, which caused a national protest. And speaking of oil, his petroleum minister, Ms. Alison Madueke, had been accused of diverting oil wealth for her own personal use to rent private jets and stuff like that. But Mr. Jonathan is yet to do anything about all that. Also, during Mr. Jonathan's time, 75% of our graduates are unemployed. And Mr. Jonathan publicly endorsed stomach infrastructure, which is feeding people, giving them bags of rice so that they would vote for you. Also, under President Jonathan, a number of journalists have been summoned by the SSS and also arrested. Before becoming the president, Mr. Jonathan actually diverted $1 million Bayelsa's Poverty Alleviation Fund into entertainment, using it to pay Beyonce when she came to perform in his state. So that is some of what I know about the three main presidential candidates. Again, I'm not being sponsored by any of them and I'm not endorsing any of them. I just want to make sure that Nigerians are well informed before casting their votes. I'm however hoping that the two candidates that will emerge from both parties will honor presidential debates. I would love to see them debate each other. Let them tell us how they will fix electricity and so many other things that needs to be fixed in Nigeria. But you guys know that I don't know much. Guess what? I'm just keeping it real.